Exercise 1.
You will hear 5 short extracts in which people talk about habits they find difficult to control. Speaker 1.
It starts as soon as I get home in the early evening. I have a quick snack and then log on to one of my favourite sites. Soon I've filled up my basket with all kinds of things. Whether I actually need any of them is irrelevant, and then head for the checkout. It's all so quick and easy. Sometimes I'm watching TV and there's an ad for a tasty-looking ready meal, and I'll log back on for a minute and order that too. Though when it's actually delivered, it usually turns out to be just junk food and it ends up in the bin.
Speaker 2.
I first realised something wasn't quite right when I kept falling asleep at all hours of the day. Getting up around 7 isn't easy when you've been up till 2 the night before, but somehow I never managed to log off until then. There are just so many great sites, particularly news and sports, and also shopping, though I rarely end up buying anything. According to a quiz I did, I do seem to have an addiction, though compared to things like overeating, I don't think it's a particularly harmful one. I mean, I'm quite fit and, unlike some of my colleagues, I always get to the office on time.
Speaker 3.
I always feel I have to be doing something. I just don't feel right if I'm not working on my fitness level, and the possible long-term effects of that are beginning to concern me. It also affects my life right now in various ways. For instance, I always go to bed late and get up early. I also need bigger meals than less active people, and although I always choose food that's good for me, it can be rather expensive and hard to find in the shops. At least, though, the fact that I go everywhere around town on foot means that I'm never held up by traffic.
Speaker 4.
It was on all the time in my parents' home, and it's like that here in my own flat. Usually the same channel too, because to tell the truth, I'm totally hooked on the same kinds of series. It's odd in a way because most people of my generation spend all their time on the internet, or, in the case of the fitter ones, doing sport every evening and weekend. I know my own lifestyle isn't particularly healthy, though at least nowadays I'm up reasonably early, unlike back in my student days when I often had trouble getting out of bed before noon.
Speaker 5.
It's always my intention to set off in plenty of time, but somehow there always seems to be something that holds me up. It may be a job that needs finishing off, an email that has to be answered, or even a TV program that hasn't quite ended. Then I end up literally running to wherever I'm going, always the last to turn up, and also often the most stressed one too. I've tried getting up earlier in the morning so that I have more hours in the day to get everything done, but the lack of sleep just makes me feel tired later on and doesn't help at all.
Exercise 2.
You will hear 5 short extracts in which people talk about deciding to take up new interests. Speaker 1.
I've always been a keen swimmer, and that keeps me in good shape. So when I made my mind up to do badminton, it was far more about socialising than exercising, especially as I'd only recently moved to this part of town and I hardly knew anyone. I hadn't realised, though, just how competitive badminton can be. So much so that I've now been invited to take part in a local championship. I've got no chance of winning it, or even coming close. And to be honest, I'm not really bothered about that. But it might be fun, so I think I'll give it a try.
Speaker 2.
I work part-time in a petrol station, which in some ways is quite a pleasant job, but last year I found that I was increasingly getting into financial difficulties, so I began to study the way electronic devices work and how to repair them. I found that fascinating, and eventually I felt confident enough to place an online ad offering my services. I got loads of replies, and I've now paid off nearly all my debts. I've thought of giving up my job at the petrol station, but I think I'd miss meeting different people every day if I worked entirely from home.
Speaker 3.
For years I'd been so scared of heights that some people used to make fun of me. So one day I decided to do something about it. Go rock climbing. Feeling that if I could do that, I'd be able to do anything, I joined a local club. On my first day, I was surprised to find there were 2 other people who joined for the same reason, and we soon became friends. Together, we got fitter and stronger and encouraged each other to keep going, until, by the end of the year, we felt unconcerned about tackling the most challenging of climbs.
Speaker 4.
I never imagined that going horse riding could be such good exercise until I'd spent a weekend trekking in the mountains with friends. That was something of a bonus, really, because what had initially attracted me to it was that it offered a contrast in every respect to my day job as a cab driver in a noisy, polluted city centre. And although it's certainly not the cheapest of activities, I find it so relaxing that I always feel it's worth every penny.
Speaker 5.
Gardening had always seemed to me as just a way of passing the time, of doing something completely different from office work, or perhaps even, for the really keen, of winning a prize for the largest homegrown vegetable. So it was only by chance that I became interested in it, when the old lady next door asked me to look after her garden while she was away. On her return, she was so delighted by my efforts that I felt I'd done something really worthwhile. So I then offered to garden for other neighbours in their 80s and 90s. They sometimes offered me money, but I always refused to accept it.
Exercise 3.
You will hear 5 short extracts in which people are talking about difficult situations they have been in. Speaker 1.
There was a storm blowing as I walked along the cliffs, and down below I noticed a rowing boat being thrown about by the huge waves. I took out my phone to call the rescue services or the police, but there was no signal. If the boat had hit the rocks, it would have been smashed to pieces, so I ran along the cliff top until I came to a small bay. I ran back and shouted to the crew to row towards it as hard as they could, and eventually they managed it. There, the waves pushed their boat into the bay, where they were able to take shelter.
Speaker 2.
It was my first night out in that city, and when I saw the last bus home disappearing round the corner, I knew I had a problem. It was cold and I couldn't afford a taxi, but I didn't want to bother my host family by asking them to pick me up, so I set off on foot, telling myself it'd only take me an hour or so. 4 hours later, I was still walking. I was soaked through and my hands were frozen. When I eventually reached the house, the family said how worried they'd been and asked why I hadn't phoned. By then I wished I had.
Speaker 3.
I realised straight away I'd been overcharged, but it was only by a small amount, and my first thought was to forget about it as I was in a hurry. Then I noticed the assistant glance at me, and somehow I knew it had been deliberate. I gently pointed out the error, but he became quite aggressive. Not wanting to get into a row about it, I asked to speak to the manager, and when she came over, I explained that I hadn't been given the correct change. The assistant angrily denied this, but the manager pointed to a security camera right above us. He immediately gave me my money.
Speaker 4.
Carlos, Alfonso and I had been camping in the mountains, and it was time to leave. Just then, a dense mist descended, and soon we realised we were completely lost. I was in favour of keeping going along the path, while Carlos suggested heading downhill. Alfonso, though, wanted to phone Mountain Rescue for help. The two of them had just started arguing when a shepherd appeared. I asked him which way we should go, and he said we'd taken a wrong turning at the bridge. So we headed back the way we'd come, turned left by the river instead of right, and within 20 minutes we'd reached the village.
Speaker 5.
I was doing a cross-country run when suddenly I tripped and fell, feeling a sharp pain in my ankle. As I lay there, I wondered whether I'd be able to stand on it, maybe even carry on running. But I remembered what I'd been taught as a nurse, so I kept it still, checking to see if it was broken. It didn't seem to be, so I decided against calling an ambulance, but I didn't want to take any chances, so I phoned my sister. She immediately offered to come and collect me, and within 15 minutes, she was able to help me to the car and take me home.